We'll have time for some questions afterwards, but with that, I'll give it to Scott.
Great, thank you, Kevin. So as Kevin mentioned, we've been doing alerting for a while. By the way, this is just about UC Davis. If you want to read it, go ahead. So we had some goals going into this. We've had an alerting system that we customized from a while back. We kind of started off when we went to Ensemble originally. We switched from OpenLink at the time, and we made the silly decision that we would make Ensemble work just like OpenLink did. It turned out to be a bad decision, but in doing that, we tried to make all the alerting and everything work just the way the old system did, which was using a bunch of different schedules based on, is it during business hours or after hours, and how many messages were queued up. So we came up with something that worked that way for a long time, but we had a project recently where we wanted to redo all of our alerting, and so we had some goals. And the first one was we wanted to have centralized management. We didn't want to have to go and say, oh, let's go into our different namespaces. We ended up with a bunch of namespaces, and we didn't want to have to, if we had a project that crossed between an ADT and an orders, and we didn't want to have to bounce around between those. It makes it easier now if we have a centralized to suppress alerts during known outages, to keep updates for alerting consistent across the namespaces. We wanted to reduce any of the alerting noise that we were seeing. If we get an alert, we want it to be actionable. We want it to be something that's useful, not just making noise. Actually, there's one other thing that we had that we wanted to continue was we have some self-healing. So if an integration was able to fix itself, then we want to keep doing that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Another thing, we wanted to utilize our existing ticketing system. We're on ServiceNow right now to keep track of our incidents. We didn't want to have to use, I think there's managed alerts that's in the Iris product, but we didn't want to have a second ticketing system, so we'll take a look at that. And then the last thing is we wanted to have some visibility as far as what's going on in our environment that might be a potential issue coming up, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So for centralized management, we have 6 or 7 namespaces right now, so the obvious answer is we'll just create a new namespace. So we created an alerting namespace, and we're forwarding the alerts now from each of the other ones into this centralized repository. One of the things that we wanted to do is take a look and see when an alert fires off, we wanted to have a lot of information as far as what happened at that moment. On the left-hand side here, you'll see a standard alert request that gets fired within Iris right now. And it contains some useful information like the configuration name, the alert text, and what time it triggered. But we expanded that quite a bit, and so we've added in, we have all of the configuration settings at the time that alert fired. In case something might change later, at least we can go back and take a look what happened. We can take a look at how many messages were queued up. We can take a look at the status of things. One of the useful things that doesn't show up is the alert groups. And of course, if we were in the namespace, we could open up the configuration item programmatically and look at it, but now we have who should be notified. It comes through in that message. One of the things you're going to find if you're doing this is we try to find out, okay, how do we move these messages, these alerts between namespaces? And I think everybody at InterSystems that you ask says, oh yeah, there's got to be a configuration item that does it, and nobody's actually able to find that. So we ended up having to modify one. So we took the onslib TCP pass-through service, which actually is built to move file streams around. And we modified it slightly to be able to serialize and deserialize any object as a JSON object. So it was pretty simple once you find it, of course, but we have custom operation and service just to be able to move those alerts around. And then one last thing, we talked about alert groups, and we wanted to, on this revamp, create consistent naming between all of our different namespaces. And part of that was in our old system, we would have it named based on the individual integrations. And so we ended up with a lot of alert groups. And we've now moved into something that's more team-based. So who's getting notified when that alert gets triggered? And again, that's to reduce the amount of effort that we have to have in managing our alerts. And then one thing that's also useful in the alert groups is we've made it so we have an alert group named disabled. And that way, if we have something that's firing off that we can't clear right away, we can just go into the alert group, just check off the disabled alert group, and then we have a rule set up just to ignore those, which saves us now from having to disable rules or anything else that's complex or more complex. Talking about the built-in, so our old system, when we had some custom stuff, we had things to, we had some custom code to monitor what was going on. InterSystems has done a lot of work on the built-in triggers and their alerting. One of the most useful that you'll find is the queue wait time. So I mentioned that when we moved from OpenLink, we had the queue count. And so we would see, okay, well, are there 100 messages queued up? Maybe that's an alert state. But that's not real useful. Then you have to know, well, if it's during business hours, maybe 100 messages isn't really a problem, but after hours, 100 messages might be more of a trigger. That sort of goes away with the queue wait time, because now we can just say, hey, if a message has been sitting in the queue for 10 minutes, that's an alert condition. It doesn't matter how many messages or what time of day. Other things, inactivity timeout, that's your standard, if you're not receiving a message that you're expecting, you can set how long do you want to wait for that to error. Alert on error will trap other things like connection issues or if there's a bad message. That's a checkbox that you probably want to turn on, but it can get noisy, so be careful. Reply code actions. The defaults on the reply code actions may work for you. We found that sometimes it does, sometimes we want to have more control. Maybe if a message fails, we want to have it suspend rather than just fail off. So I would definitely recommend going in and customizing the reply code actions to make it more meaningful for the integration that you're working on. And those actually work with the next two, the retry interval and the failure timeout. So how frequently is it going to retry something to try to fix itself, and at what point does it just give up and throw an error? And then the last one, or second to last one, alert retry grace period, it can be set to say, hey, if an error happens, wait this amount of time before you actually throw the error. So that's something that you might find useful as far as the out-of-box one. And I've highlighted one, this is a last-minute addition, but stay connected is something that I think isn't understood as well as it could be. And what happens is, when I talked about self-healing, and like an interface that can fix itself is much better than actually waking me up in the middle of the night. And on an operation, if it runs into a connection error, it will actually automatically drop that connection and retry itself, which is kind of the equivalent of being woken up and toggling a connection on and off just to see if that fixes it. On the service side, on the inbound connections, that doesn't happen. By default, stay connected is set to -1, which means it's going to try to keep that port open all the time. If you had a connection to an inbound system and for some reason that connection goes down, but Iris doesn't know about it, it's going to just leave that port open. The downstream system isn't going to be able to connect again, and it's not going to automatically heal itself. And so you might want to look into, if your partner is willing to change that and say, stay connected for 10 minutes and then drop the connection. That way, if you don't have activity, it can actually drop the connection and allow an automatic retry. So just a little suggestion there. Other things that we came up with, we wanted to have things to be able to suppress alerts for known downtimes. We know that a system is going to have some maintenance going on in the middle of the night. Or we have a holiday coming up. So we've created some lookup tables, and so we can put in either by individual configuration item or by the alert group and say, hey, this team's going to be installing a Windows patch on their servers tonight. So just stop alerting for them for a certain amount of time. So we have these lookup tables that we can use. We added in holidays. Nobody wants to, if we have a business hours process, we don't want to be notified on a holiday, even though it's Monday through Friday. Let's see. So holidays becomes an interesting problem. So we actually have a BPL just to deal with holidays and after hours. This is a little code snippet of the BPL that just says, hey, if an alert goes off check and see if we're on a holiday. If it is a holiday, it actually hits a delay in the BPL and waits till the next morning to try again. And another thing for after hours that we did is we said, okay, so something goes off in the middle of the night. Why don't we go ahead and check it before we send out alert, see if it's still in error. So we have code now, so if something happens after hours, we actually check that configuration item, see if it's still in error or if it's now working. And it saves us from generating extra noise for our alerting system. In order to find out what the status of a configuration item, there's no easy way. I've actually included on the screen there for you the global that you'll need to read to see what the status is of a configuration item. And I've added it with a namespace parameter, because if you have a centralized namespace, you'll need to go out to a different namespace, check that configuration item. Anyways, added up there for your convenience. We wanted to utilize our existing ticket system. I mentioned that we use ServiceNow. One of the nice things that ServiceNow allows us to do is we can now correlate events to actual alerts and incidents. So if we have something that goes off in the middle of the night, it's very noisy, we can generate an alert or an event. It has a unique identifier that's based on the namespace and the configuration item name and a couple other items. And then ServiceNow will actually tell us, well, you had 7 events, but it's only going to generate 1 incident ticket for us, and it's only going to page us on the first one, and depending on the rules within ServiceNow as far as re-notifying or escalation. When we built that out, we used the publicly available ServiceNow APIs. I've got them, provided a link there if you're using ServiceNow, easy way to go and take a look at the APIs there. You will have to work with your ServiceNow developers for part of that automation piece. We can create the event. Someone in ServiceNow is going to just have to generate a little bit of code to know what happens once they get the event, what the business process in ServiceNow is going to be. And this is kind of looking at what one of those might look at like. So you can see we're sending in the message. We have business partners that might be listed there. So that can go into the ServiceNow ticket. So when we're notified, we can immediately know who to contact. Off to the right, you can see where on this particular alert, there were 3 events that actually triggered, but only 1 incident. Visibility of potential issues. So the last thing I want to talk about is how do we know if something might be coming up that's going to cause us a problem, or if things are just not working right. And so we've generated some reports, and unfortunately this is all hand-coded reporting. It's not using any of the built-in InterSystems tools for reporting. But we have a daily status for our production that shows us if any alerts or errors have happened in the previous day. It keeps track of if we're going to run out of storage space in any of our private file systems. One of the things that's a little interesting in Iris is you can put in SSL certificates, but there's no way to actually see in their GUI what the expiration dates of those are. So we added those to our reports as well, where it lists out for us hey, you have a certificate that's in use that's going to expire in the next 30 days. And so we have a little bit of notification before something just completely dies on us. I mentioned on the alert groups, you can select disabled, so it'll stop sending us alerts. So part of our report actually gives us a list of anything where that's set as disabled, because it's very easy to turn off the alerting in the middle of the night and forget to turn it back on. So that lets us keep track of that. And then we have a separate report that actually daily goes off and shows us any changes that have been made over the past day to our productions. And that helps us identify, did somebody change something here? Is that what's causing the problem? Let's see here. Future enhancements, this list was a little bit longer when I first built this, but we've actually managed to knock a few things off. But one thing that we are missing that we used to have is if an alert happened, but now it's fixed itself, we used to get an all clear. And we're working through that right now so that if something does get fixed, we're woken up in the middle of the night, and before you roll out of bed, if we get the message, the page that says, hey, it's fixed itself, that's something that would be nice to have. Let's see here. Well, that's all I had to present for today. So thank you. Open up for questions.
Any questions? If nobody else has any questions, I'll ask you, how do you keep track of the changes to the production configuration?
Well, not well, but it's all manual code. So we built a whole diff global. So each day we keep track of all of the settings for every configuration item, store it in a global, then the next day when it runs, it compares it to the last one. So it's manual, but it works.
You're using the same technique you are to grab those settings and insert them into the message
exactly.
itself, but you're storing that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Sure.
If we're interested in this and implementing it ourselves, do you have more documentation somewhere that we can view?
I don't have any formal documentation on that. I'd recommend first reaching out to your service engineer, but my email address is up here as well if you want to reach out to me directly, and I can see about setting up some time and we can talk about that.
Yeah, and I can help arrange that too if you need to, so grab the addresses and get in contact with us. Did I see a hand over here? Yes.
You mentioned that you implemented some rules for some of these alerts.
Yeah, so I didn't show them, but yeah, so once the alert triggers in our centralized space, we have a set of routing rules plus some BPLs to handle what's going to happen when those trigger. And I apologize, I don't have a.
So are the rules implemented in BPL, or are you using
most of the rules are implemented just through the standard rule editor.
Okay.
But some of the more complex things like handling what happens on a holiday is implemented with a BPL.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
What would you say was the effort involved to do this in time or resources?
Wow. I don't have a good estimate. This has kind of been a side project. It wasn't officially on the radar. It was on the radar. But there's my boss, Mike, in the back, who's going to tell us. It was low priority, right? So as we found time, we came back to it. It's I mean, you could say it's been an ongoing thing since we've gone live, just trying to enhance this and make it better. Another thing I'll just point out is make sure when you go live with your new alerting system that your networking team doesn't also decide to upgrade your perimeter firewall, because within 2 days of doing this, all of our connections went down. And so I started getting the calls going, what's wrong with your alerting? So anyways, it was kind of entertaining.
Yeah, so when we are sending the, to raise the ticket in ServiceNow, how we are maintaining the severity of the ticket? Are you also sending some parameter like save 1 ticket, save 2 ticket to ServiceNow?
So how are they correlating the
Severity?
Oh, so that's a good question. So in the message that we send into ServiceNow, we actually set a severity level. So that's part of the message. And I apologize, I didn't include that message in here. But it is something we can send in. And again, that's something you'll work with whoever is doing the programming on the ServiceNow side, because we're just sending it in as raw data in the event. And then when it creates when it takes that event and creates an alert or an incident ticket, it goes and reads that field and populates.
Okay. And the second question is, I see there's something called stay connected, right? So stay connected
Okay.
option is there. So is it like that it will auto bounce the BS, business service, if you don't see any activity for such long time?
So we used to have something that would do that would actually go out and say, okay, if we had an alert in the old system, it would bounce it. But now we're making use of built-in functionality. So on the operations, they'll automatically drop and try to reconnect if there's a message queued up. So we didn't need to do that on the outbound connections. On the inbound side, that's where the stay connected came in. So if we don't have stay connected all the time, stay connected -1, then it actually will drop that connection after that time period and then allow a new connection.
Thank
And
you.
that saved us from more custom code.
It seemed like there used to be a time when stay connected, you kind of like that on, and a lot of the downstream applications like to know that you have that
Right.
connection.
Well,
But networking these days, oftentimes, they'll close and open a connection, especially if it's idle for a long time. So having that disappear seems to be pretty normal anymore, and so the idea that it just makes a connection when it needs to eliminates a lot of that noise.
Right. We've actually we have an override in place in our productions where we don't use the -1. I mean, if you
Yeah.
create something now, it'll be -1 out of the box, but there's a way to go in and create your own system
Yeah.
defaults. And
So I encourage customers to
Yeah.
kind of think twice about using -1 for that
Right.
setting.
There are other systems that you might connect to where they're going to be aggravated if you're not stay connected. So like I said, you have to talk with your business
Yeah.
partners and make sure that the setting matches so you're not creating extra headache for them as you keep dropping your connection. But
Well, yes. For every rule, there's
but
an
yeah.
exception. But yeah.
Right, of course.
With your all clear, are you looking to also send notification out to ServiceNow to resolve?
Good question.
And then-
I
and
don't know how that's going to work out.
And on a second question, how are you handling P2s or P1s? Are you incorporating any kind of delay, or is it an immediate, what criteria are you utilizing or thinking of utilizing in those when you may have to do a P2 or a P1 ticket out to ServiceNow?
So within our tickets, right now it's pretty much going to whoever's on call. I mentioned escalation. We don't have a lot of rules set up for escalation at the moment, but that would all be within ServiceNow rules and not within anything that Iris is dealing with.
I was kind of wondering how you have dealt with it.
Yeah, right now it's pretty much being dealt with by going to so the automated process goes to whoever is on call. We have a TOC that monitors ServiceNow in the middle of the night, so if they get an escalation, then they'll call out to the supervisor or director for the escalation path manually.
Make sure you have multiple layers of escalation.
Yeah.
Hello. When we have downtime, for example, we use EPIC as electronic medical record, and we have downtimes for SU upgrades, those things.
Right.
During that downtime, there are jobs scheduled to run during that time, may not get any data, so those jobs has to be rerun manually after the downtime.
Right.
How are you handling that?
Let's see here. So I had, there were some lookup tables. So the top one over here is a lookup table that we have that just has scheduled downtimes. So if we know that a system is going to be down, Epic's going to do an upgrade, we would put in their connections into here with basically the start and the stop time. You can see on these, we're just using the HL7 date representation. At some point, I might switch that over to use the actual schedule nomenclature that's in Iris. But it's lookup table driven for scheduled downtimes. But it does help out a lot.
Yeah, my question is more of jobs which is scheduled to run during the downtime may not get any data from EPIC. but we need to run those jobs manually after the downtime comes up.
Oh.
How are you handling that?
Yeah, so we don't have much that happens. If we get messages that need to be delivered to Epic, they just queue up. We don't have a lot of jobs where we're looking for Epic data and then that would be a problem after the downtime. But yeah. Now I'm in trouble. Dave's got the microphone.
Now, I was just interested to know how many alerts you're getting per day or per week. Is it in the thousands, or is it just really?
Oh no, it's pretty low right now, which is really nice actually. So we can go for an entire on-call shift where we're not getting an after-hour alert, or we can have something that messes up and we'll get a lot of alerts in very specified things when someone trips over a network cable or something.
Do you have any processes in place to look at the alerts that are actually getting people out of bed and do the root cause analysis and an attempt to drive that down? And have you actually seen any
No
benefit?
official process. We have the reports that are being generated, so that tells us how many alerts were fired. So we have, that comes to us as an email each day, and so we can go back and look through those.
And what are the main causes? Is it user error, human error, or is it technology failure?
Mostly for us, we've seen it's network connectivity. The FTP operations tend to be pretty noisy. If they can't make a connection, they love to fire off and send an error between retries. So that's one. We've had some connectivity with external vendors where they're not as reliable after hours, for instance, and so we've seen some of that. Nothing. I think those would be probably the most common things that we see. Yeah, so for us, we would create.
There has to be
lookup
creation
table.
of the holiday lookup table every year to.
Yeah, so that holiday table has to be manually edited as next year's holiday schedule comes out, so we know when our clinic downtimes would be, for instance.
Well, good questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.